So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, I think we should talk about part-time working slash fractional working.
Mm. Do you have
Yeah.
particular thoughts you want to that are boiling at the surface you want to talk about?
So the reason it was on my mind was because Rachel and I had had a conversation previously about the rise in fractional working and what that means for part-time working and perceptions of those two things, which I shan't go too much into because it's very much Rachel's original thinking. Um, But it's been coming up for me more recently when people have been thinking about careers and how they are approaching jobs and when they want to be part-time working or if they've been part-time working and what that means for how they apply for their next thing. Um, and sort of a
Mm.
perception about it being problematic or kind of slowing down progression or that there are no senior roles that are part-time, stuff like that. So
Mm.
those are the
Mm.
kinds of things on my mind, but what do you think?
Yeah, because I think it's very gendered that fractional is used more in a masculine setting, and fractional implies intentional, um, whereas part-time has many longer standing associations with compromise, with fitting around family, fitting around others. It has a different sort of invokes different kind of concepts because of how it's been evolved over time. And even just part-time, the implication that you're less than, which is ironic because fractional means the same, but there's something about fitting fractions together as opposed to part of a whole, right? Being less than that the part time has. Um, so I've been thinking about it a lot. I've never worked part time. That's not true. That's a complete lie. I haven't worked part time because I've been compelled to around family and care and responsibilities. So I haven't had that specific experience, which many women have, where they have forced to make certain choices between their career and their employment, right? However, I've worked compressed hours and I've worked part-time contracts, and I do think there's a difference when you work part-time. I work a part-time contract or a fractional contract, or I work with multiple clients, but I can be agile with that, right? Within that, I have flexibility that isn't necessarily afforded to everyone. But I really dislike the lack of imagination around senior leadership. You could have more people, more brains in the outfit.
Mm.
On fewer hours. Like it's mad to me and um, very difficult. But I'm also incredibly mindful, as this podcast is about managers, particularly, that there's being a manager is difficult and finding opportunities if you want them on a fractional part-time basis is difficult, but also managing staff who have very different schedules and how to create balance and harmony and understand different people's demands and not assume the full timers will always pick up the slack sometimes, but also understanding that part timers have different arrangements. That context is specific to admissions probably. There's an expectation that the full timers will work all the extra hours, and the part timers are like may or may not be able to work some of the hours, right? Whereas the full timers still have responsibilities
Mm.
for working weekends and evenings. So apologies, that probably came from an admissions context.
Mm.
Oh, I used to manage a job share where they worked part-time and it worked brilliantly and was sort of the
Mm.
opposite of what you just said, where actually because it was two part-time people who were I think 0.6. And so actually we had more than full-time coverage, which was so helpful for those
Mm.
wraparound things because we were doing delivering skills training courses. And so I needed people to be in training rooms to meet the trainer before 9 a.m. and things like that. And so it was incredibly helpful to have two people covering that role. And they also had a bit of crossover then at lunchtime where they would do an in-person handover, which was so helpful. The downside was it turned out one of them kept feeling ill when she was in the office and she was like, I think I'm allergic to work. What is this? And it turned out she had a really severe cat allergy, and the other lady who shared her desk and therefore her chair had two cats. So once we
Mm.
realised that and we were able to get them separate chairs, everything was fine.
Oh no.
But it was a very uncomfortable couple of months for her. Well, she just was like, I think something weird is going on. I keep being really ill in the office.
Oh no. I was going to say, my husband's boss up until recently actually was two women on a job share, and it's a very senior role, sort of top of the organization, in the public sector, and it worked really, really well. And they had moved from job to job together as a package, and they would apply to things as a pair. And it was a similar. They were, I think, both 0.6, and so they had that crossover, and one of them was really, really good with the people stuff, and one of them was really good with the strategy stuff, and it was like they got more than the sum of their parts. And it was interesting because it was the first time I'd seen anyone that senior be in anything less than a 1.0 FT. That I'd always been told in a various jobs and environments that it's like, oh no, we must have full time for that role. Well, we must, that can't possibly be part time. And there was no, there's been a lack of creativity, sort of in our thinking about how we cover the work that needs to be done. And I would have thought post COVID and post lockdown, and in the shift to digital nomads and more flexible arrangements, that would have become more prevalent, but that hasn't been really what we've seen, at least not in the places I've worked and the people I've talked to. The only time I have gone down from a full time is, as you say, Rachel, when, after I came back from maternity leave, and was trying to juggle incredibly rigid childcare arrangements, and I came back 4 days a week, which then I would constantly get contacted at home on the Friday. Oh, I know it's your day at home, working from home, but can I ask you? No, it's my non-working day. And I just found that I was still working 5 days, but only getting paid for 4. And so I just thought, well, this is rubbish. So then I tried doing the 5/4, which just resulted in basically doing 6/5, because everybody still contacted me on my non-working days. And I was doing more than I should have been doing, even if I'd been full time. So I thought, this is a nonsense. I'm just going to go back to full time and suck it up, and everything else had to give.
I would say that full time doesn't mean full time as well. So I work compressed hours in a role where I worked for 5 days over 4, so 4 like 9-hour days, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
People still treat you like you're part time.
Yeah, 100%.
They don't, regardless if you're doing 37 or 38, whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's a psychology about the Monday to Friday in our world that drives me mad. Ironically, I was just thinking, talking earlier, that irony is very senior academic roles are often fractional, professorships, stuff like that.
Yeah, very true.
Portfolio careers are much more common in the senior academic space, in the senior research space than academic.
Good point.
I was also just wondering if we should unpack what FTE means, because I appreciate we've used the acronym quite a lot.
Management speak. Ah! Jargon. Thank you for calling me out. Yeah, full-time.
Well, I think I started it.
No, yeah. FTE stands for full-time equivalent, and it's actually interestingly got the most airtime recently with restructures and job losses, because senior leaders often talk about FTE, full-time equivalents, and then they're asked, and how many people is that? And they don't necessarily know, because it can, particularly when there is a greater proportion of females in part-time roles, and they are in predominantly in more junior roles, like they are usually disproportionately impacted. So it might be 50 FTE, but it could be 70 plus people affected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so for budgeting purposes, often people you have the two categories. So you have full-time equivalency, and then you have
Oh,
headcount.
person.
Like how many actual head people is that
Mm.
in the team? Yeah.
Mm. And depending on how convenient it is to your bosses as to which one they'll use, like when they decide that you're over-resourced, they'll be like, "We've got 10 people in that team," and then when they're arguing for some money, they'll be like, "Well, I've only got 8 FTE." Like, pick a lane, guys.
Yeah.